Hi, everyone. My name is Taylor Richmond. As Connor mentioned, I am a master's student at ESF. I am working on my master's degree in forest resource management. I actually defend my thesis tomorrow, so this is a nice practice talking to you guys. I see some of you here, I know you. This might be a little simple for what you're looking for, but I would like to just kind of get into some ideas about how to get to know your soils in your own backyard. I am going to be starting. Oh, there we go. Overview. So we are going to start with why soils are important, what they're doing for you in your backyard. Next, we're going to kind of go into a bit of how logging impacts your soils, if you have any logging done in your backyard, best management practice, what they are and how they protect your soils, and just a tad bit into my research on soil compaction. And lastly, I'm going to end with some great resources for you to really dive into your own backyard. So first, I know everyone just thinks that soil is dirt. Soil is not dirt until it comes into your house and you have to sweep it up. Before then, it's soil, and it does a lot of great things to help you and your forests. So first, soil is going to be the first stop for all the water that comes down for the rain. So it's dropping into your soils, it's going down into the water column. And while it's doing that, it's being held in those air pockets for your plants that are growing back there, for your trees to access at a later time when it's a bit drier. Also, while it's filtering down your your soil column, it's filtering out pollutants that might have gone into the water. So think of your soil as just this big sieve, and as the water is moving down, there are chemical reactions attracting some of those pollutants. It's getting some of the sediment out of the water, and then it's making that water nice and clean by the time it gets to your waterways. It also helps support biodiversity in your backyard. So a lot of people see their forests as just from the ground up, but really most of the important things that happen are right down deep in the soil. So you take a handful of soil, you're going to get thousands and thousands of tiny little critters, which are called microbiota, and they are actively working to help your forest ecosystem grow and thrive. So there are fungi that attach to plant roots that help transform elements like phosphorus and nitrogen into forms that are absorbable by your plant. They're taking all of that leaf litter and all those trees that are falling down, and they're decomposing them and making those nutrients available to once again go back into your forest system. And it's also, soil is just a nice living habitat for a lot of animals that are helping to support the entire food web. Obviously, trees need help standing up. They don't just kind of float around. So that's going to give your soil some substrate. And also, as I mentioned, it's really key in storing nutrients and keeping nutrients in that forest system, instead of it being run off in water and transported to a different area. So I want you to imagine this is your home, or you can imagine your home, and you're thinking, I really love my forest, but I'd love to log and maybe make some money. And that's a great idea. I fully support that. So you hire a team, they log, great. But there's a few things I think you should keep in mind when you are going to have someone on your land doing something as extensive as logging. So first of all, there's rutting. Rutting happens when large vehicles go over a area of land over and over again. As you can see, this large area right here, there's a bunch of puddling. Doesn't seem like a big deal, right? But the problem is that when you have ruts like this, they're basically just water slides that are, as your water is running down the slope, it's picking up more and more soil when it rains, and it's eroding all of your soil away. This water is getting transported to streams, so you're going to have sedimentation. That is really bad for insect and water species like fish, because you're basically suffocating them. It's transporting more nutrients to those waterways too, so it can lead to events like hypoxia or algal blooms where there's too much of a certain nutrients. And it's also just degrading your land and making it harder for water to be absorbed into the water, which can lead to, into the soil, which can lead to flooding. You're also going to have quite a bit of soil compaction from these vehicles. So I like to think of it as this. You take a bag of flour and you pour it into a bowl. It's nice and fluffy, right? And you start shaking it and you see it gets smaller and smaller. So those air pockets are getting smaller and smaller. It's kind of coming out of your flour. But then imagine pressing that flour down as small as you can make it. And you're just pressing it over and over and it gets smaller and smaller. And so that's kind of what's happening to your soils as these vehicles are passing back and forth, bringing the logs that have been cut down out of the forest. So your soils are getting compressed. And as that happens, you're losing air and you're making it harder for the roots to penetrate outwards into the soil. So it's having a harder time growing out. So you're having less root growth because the trees are being smothered. Less root growth means that there's more water the water that is in the soil is not being absorbed into the plant. So you're going to have more water in your soil, and then more water is leading to more pooling, which is going to cause less tree growth. So it's kind of this feedback loop that can happen that really decreases the productivity of your forests. Also, compaction, it reduces the flow of water through the soil column, like I talked about before. So if your soil is compact and water is coming down, it's just going to bounce off and run downwards. And that is going to, along with rutting, is going to add more sedimentation into the water. And it's going to have less water and nutrients available for your trees if all of the nutrients is being transported off the slope. So I just think of it, who wants to be squished into a pile of soil? No one. You want it to be nice and fluffy at a good density so that you can grow your roots out. So it doesn't seem that bad, but there are times where it can get pretty bad. These are great examples. See these deep ruts that can happen. These aren't even that deep, but you can see that the water is pooling here and flowing downwards only in this location. So the water is gaining velocity, and as it gains velocity down the slope, it's picking up more and more soil, and it's going to lead to deeper and deeper rutting. So even if you're not left with areas that look like this, they can eventually become pretty deep because of rain that comes through. Okay, so you might just be like, well, I'm here. I'm just this tiny little parcel of land, right? So that's fine. But then you have people over here that are also having this happen. Then you have a cement Walmart that's happening over here that's decreasing infiltration. And so what's going to happen is you're going to get more and more runoff from all these little parts. And then they're going to end up coming into your waterway and into your drinking water, and they're going to cause a lot of problems downstream. Here are some pictures. As you can see, the stark differences between a lot of sedimentation and cleaner water. And this is another example of where an outlet is pouring into a main riverway, and you can see all that sedimentation coming through. So it really does add up. Even if you think you're just this small parcel, if it happens over and over again, then we're going to have serious issues, which we do run into. So what are some things to keep in mind when you are thinking about logging, thinking about having someone come on your land? There are these things called best management practices. So I would like to note down here that here's the website that's going to be sent to you. So this is available completely online for you to look at. This is mostly for people working in the logging industry. But the point of these is to protect water quality. It's going to these are things that minimize erosion and surface runoff, all of the bad, nasty things we have already talked about. And this is just to help overall keep your logging a bit more sustainable and eco-centric. I would like to note that this does say voluntary, so that is something to keep in mind when you are hiring people to come on your land. So best management practices can look very different to different sites, but mostly you're going to have water diversions. These are really important features on your skid trails or your roads that the logging trucks run down. So you are going to see these right here. It's kind of hard to tell, but it's basically just a big berm of water. And this is a water bar, and you're going to have the water, it's going to come down your slope, but then it diverts off into your forest system. So that's going to slow the water. That's going to help filter the water before it hits your waterways near you. And as you can see, there's another one here. So these are pretty consistent throughout, and these really do help to divert water off. There are other forms of water diversions that you can find in the book, but this is a very common one. I would also like to bring attention to dirty forests. As you can see down here, many people might think of this as ugly, yuck, I don't want to see that in my backyard. But the problem is after logging, you have, so before you moved, before you had these trees blocking all this soil, right? When rain would come, they would bounce off and then slow down and hit your soils. But now these trees are gone. And so if you have all of this slash is what it's called, all of this dirty stuff gone, that rain is just going to hit your soil and take it with it as it goes downstream. So that's going to make this area that was logged less inhabitable for trees that you want to regrow. It's going to add more sediment into the waterways. And it's just overall going to dry out your soils from the sun just bleaching it right on the top, and wind is going to blow by and turn that soil over. So you're going to have less of that really good nutritious stuff that your trees like. This stuff, on the other hand, is protecting your soil. It's giving it cover from the elements. It's going to also shade your saplings if that's the type of tree that you would like to regrow. Then it's also going to add nutrients back into your soil. So you are going to have to look at this for, 10 to 15 years as they decompose. But all of those nutrients that would have been removed along with this slash are now going back into your ecosystem and helping your trees thrive. I would also like to mention a key part of logging is minimizing skid trails. See, skid trails are here's your parcel. Here is where the trees are that are logged. You really want your land to have one main skid trail and have tertiary trails coming off. And you want there to be as little skid trails as possible, because most of the compaction that happens from these logging machines happens within the first 4 passes. So you really don't want to have numerous numbers of trails with lower passes, because that compaction is already going to happen. You really want to keep your skid trail numbers as low as possible. So that might mean that you're not going to have this big, beautiful walking trail that you're hoping to get after your logging job is done. That might not be great for your soils. That's going to be something that you have to talk about with your forester that you work with. So a little bit about my research. Oh, I cannot get this to work right. All right. So my research compared skidders equipped with bare tires and skidders equipped with chains right here and tracks. Chains are a normal technology that have been used. They are added to the outside of tires on skidders to help in wetter conditions, with traction on snow, in steeper conditions. So they're pretty standard use for skidders. This, however, the tracks right here, this is a newer technology, and it basically is an attachable form of dozer tracks to the outside of the tire. The theoretical thought process here is how this could help soils is that these bars are spreading out the weight of the skidder to help spread the load and keep it evenly displaced. Over here, you can see that there are certain points that are really going to just stick right into the soil. So all those chains and clumping, they're not as evenly spread and dispersing the weight. So my research wanted to look into comparing these two things. Now this video, so as you can see, this is a skidder. It's very large. I would like to note that on the back, we are carrying a hitch, and this hitch is about 3,600 pounds, which is rather light for a load. So you have to be thinking that how heavy these machines are and what they're doing to your soils. So the outcomes of my research, we found that there were no really strong differences between chains and tracks on skidders, which is great news because Chains actually add about 600 pounds to the skidder total, while tracks add about 2,000 pounds. So the addition of those 1,500 pounds really doesn't affect soil compaction as much as we thought it might. So it really is doing a job of spreading the weight more evenly. This is good news because with further research and interest, we can find how they do on wetter slopes and steeper slopes, and maybe they will become a best management practice. I've had loggers say that they love that it increases the traction that they get and they're able to access better areas of the forest. However, the other logger found that the increased fuel consumption and hard wear on their skidder was not worth it. So it really is just still up in the air, and further research would really give us a better idea. Okay, so now you're sitting here, you're like, okay, great. That's the logger, but what can I do? All right, so let's go into that. First thing you can do is what you're doing right now. You are learning about your soils. I think a lot of people love learning about trees and they love learning about varieties, but people don't think about the substrate that those plants are in. So you being here is a great first step. I'm also going to leave you with some great resources to do a deep dive into the backyards of your forests. And that will really help you feel better and more confident in knowing what your forests need and your land. So next, we're going to have managing expectations. So as I mentioned before, some of the best things you can do for your soils might be ugly. They might be leaving that slash so it's not this big, beautiful field. You might not have this huge ATV track that you're hoping to have after logging. And if you do, there might be some bumps in it to keep the water off the road, or you might have to gravel it. So just managing your expectations of what your land is going to look like and talking to whoever you're working with on, if you are going to log, on what you should expect things to look like. And lastly, I think most importantly is to advocate for your soil. So it can't talk, but you can talk to your logger or whoever you're working with, and they should ask you, what are your goals for here? Obviously you'd like to make money, but one of your top goals should be to have an ecosystem approach to this, that you really want to work with loggers that implement BMPs and that they close out their job sites in a sustainable way. So those are some things that you can do. Let's learn a bit more about how you can learn about your soils. My favorite website is going to be USDA Web Soil Survey. Here is that link, and that'll be sent to you. So you're going to put that link in, and you're going to get this website to your right. You're going to push that big green button because you know you want to. Next, you're going to get this page. I want you to look over here in the quick navigation. You can do address, state and county. It depends on what you're looking at, latitude and longitude. If you're just looking at a piece of land without an address, anything you can do. I'm going to go ahead and put in the address. I put in the Heiberg Forest, which is where one of my research projects was. So if you want to zoom in or zoom out right here, move around, that's great. But I really want you to focus on the AOIs. That stands for area of interest. So these little buttons, you're going to click and then you're going to drag it and make a square. I want to look right there. And this is what it's going to look like. So it's zoomed in. We have this square, and then you're going to go up to these tabs. These tabs are going to tell you anything you want to know about these soils pretty much. I went to soil map. And you can see it's splitting up the soils by the type of soil they are. And over here, these units represent the map symbols. This biggest chunk is the one I want to look at. So I'm going to click right here, and it's going to give me this page. A lot of information, I understand, but there's a lot of useful information here too. So what I really want you to look at when you're looking at your soils is to look at the drainage class right here. This one, it's a little small, but it says well-drained. That's great. Well-drained soils are great for tree growth. Nothing wants to be sitting in dirty water, right? And so that's gonna really tell you a lot about your soils. Also, your depth to the water table. This one is only about 12 to 24 inches. So now you know that your soil is sitting like this, and at 2 feet down below your soil is where the water is going to sit when it is full at capacity. So it's going to, so when you go over it and compact, you're really not that far from where the water is going to be. So if you have a high water table, your chances of puddling and rutting and compaction are going to be a lot higher. Same as if you have wetter soils, because wetness generally causes more and more compaction and rutting. Lastly, I'd also like you to look at this, the word fragipan. It's basically an impermeable layer in the soil. So just think of it, you have soil, and it just hits this wall. So that's basically going to be similar to your water table if you have one. That's just like a layer that water's not getting through. So if you have one of those, it's also really important to note that you're going to have more and more compaction. It's going to be likelier to rut. A lot of these things, the type of soil up here, you can Google things like that. If you really want to get into the chemistry, I would take a look here, but there's just a lot of great data for you to look through and find. I also want to go to the Data Explorer. It's the next tab up here. And really, so there's Intro to Soils. They'll teach you what you want to know. I am on the soil's properties and qualities. So you can look at, soil erosion factors, soil health. This is going to give you anything you want to know, water features. This is really going to help you dive in and understand what's happening below the surface of what you're just seeing. I actually have a great anecdotal story about this. My dad had a piece of land and he was planting cherry trees and he wanted them in this one spot. So we went out there and then I looked up his property and I showed him that basically it was similar to this. He wanted to plant his trees here in this little part, but that soil, the water table was only at 12 inches and cherry trees wanted it really dry. So over here where it was a little more upslope, it was 4 feet up or down. And so he was able to have his cherries there and now his cherries are growing. So you can see that even though this might seem like a bunch of gobbledygook, there are really a lot of interesting uses for it, especially if you want to know where your plants are going to go in your backyard or on your land or where you want to plant your orchard. Some other great resources. Obviously, Cornell Cooperative Extension, they're having me do this for you. Great resource. But they also have great places for you to get your soil tested. You don't really need to get your soil tested if you are going to do more forestry, but if it's a great resource for if you want to plant trees like the cherries that my dad did, or you're looking at your garden. I just thought I would throw these out. Virginia Tech, my alma mater, also has a great lab that you can send your soil samples into. It's really easy. You get it back. I know Virginia Tech will tell you what fertilizer to use, when to use it, how often. So those are great resources. I'd also like to mention the New York City Watershed Agricultural Council. That's who I work with. They do a lot of great work in the Catskills, working with loggers to implement BMPs and subsidize BMPs for them. So they have a great forestry website if you want to learn a little bit more about their programs and if you can find loggers that are working with them. Also, I want to show this publication. This publication is just about forest soils and why they need protecting. But also Tree Search from the Forest Service is just a great search engine that has any scientific articles or publications that have been done through the Forest Service. So anything your mind can think of, you can plop in there and see if there's any research been done on it. So those are some really great resources for you guys. I'm done with my rambling. I'm sorry if I talked too fast. I was a little nervous, but I'd be really happy to answer any of your questions.